Hello and welcome to Jump To It for IrishRacing.com and Betting Expert. I'm Shane Anderson. The jump season is almost over. We're 1 week away from the biggest betting race they have in the UK, that of course being the Grand National. 3-day meeting coming from Aintree. Really looking forward to talking about that. But of course, there'll be plenty of attention now shifting to the flat season. We'll make sure you've got all things flat season covered here on Jump To It as well. All right, plenty to get into on today's show. Let's welcome in the panel. Stephen Harris and Ed Quigley join me once again. Guys, good to be back with you. We're a week out from the Grand National, Stephen. What's the weather like in the UK at the moment?
Well, we've actually issues here, Shane. First time ever in March, but of course that's fatal now because as soon as you've sort of taken the covers and the moss off the garden furniture, the forecast for next week sort of snow, -2 at night, 4 degrees, wintry showers. I mean, talking about Aintree, they've actually been watering there. It's good to soft on the Grand National course, which is definitely bad news for those of us who are on cloth cap at a big price because he wants good, decent jumping ground. And if they've watered and there could be wintry showers, we could be in all sorts of trouble. So perhaps it's time to take your stake back out of him at around 5-1. He could be a very short price if the weather forecast is right next week.
Ed, good to catch up with you. I think Stephen raises a really good point there. It might be time now to start sort of levelling out some bets if you have backed cloth cap early on in the piece for the Grand National. But with the way that the weather can unfold, it makes it truly one of the great tests of any jumps race there is around the world, the Grand National.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had the 2001 Red Marauder where they came home with different postcodes, didn't they? But by and large, yeah, I mean, the forecast for, how should we say, the 4 or 5 days before the Grand National itself looks absolutely lovely up in Liverpool, I think. So it's a case of, I think they're just kind of don't want the ground to dry out too much. They're just almost watering to try and maintain good to soft. I get a bit annoyed, but it's just a personal bugbear when I understand the reason they do it. But I remember the days of, Mr. Frisk running on good to firm and, Edge John Blur's Champion Chase, which was like the tarmac at Heathrow Airport. But, it's a different era now, and I understand that. But look at it, if the weather holds true, nonetheless, there should be sunshine, blue skies for the Grand National itself, and it should be, as always, a thrilling spectacle.
All right, guys, we'll talk more about the Grand National shortly, but let's get into some of the latest news around in the racing circles. I think it's certainly been well documented, guys, that, particularly in the UK, there's been enormous challenges with the lockdowns that have occurred over the best part of the last 12 months. Figures up to £325 million have been missing from racecourse coffers because of the lockdown situation. Now, Stephen, the government's come forward and they're offering a level of relief, a package put forward, which is basically a loan to the levy board to help with operational aspects for racecourses over the next period of time. They're talking £21 million. Do you think that's enough?
Well, I think it's a sticking plaster, isn't it? Racing is in big trouble. There's no doubt about that. We've got far too much racing. The prize money is now beginning to get reduced. I see that there's talk of reducing the win money and trying to dilute it down to sort of 8th place just to try and keep people on board. I mean, anecdotally, I know people who own horses who are getting out of the game as fast as they can or running them in France or selling them to try and escape, to be honest. It's really worrying times. We've sort of got the double whammy, really, of COVID, plus betting shops have started to close, and a lot of the income for racing and prize money is betting shop related. We're sort of in that sort of crossover period between it going to media rights, betting shops. So it's very complicated. £21 million is obviously welcome. It'll help tide things over, but there's going to be some serious rethinking. I think we are going to see courses closed perhaps, and certainly we're going to need to cull some of the racing that we've got at the moment.
I think you touched on a couple of really important points there. And Ed, over to you. I mean, there is a massive squeeze going on at the moment, and it's not just racing that requires funding. There'll be all aspects, particularly all through the UK, as to needing some level of government support. But racing's got to make some very tough calls, I think, over the next year to 2 years to guarantee its long-term survival.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've touched on the phrase in the previous show of like the perfect storm, and I think when we used it in regards to the Irish wiping the floor with the Brits at Cheltenham, and I think it's a bit of a perfect storm in the wider sense in that COVID's hit, everything's type of hit. There's the affordability checks are coming in. There's issues with levy board. It does feel like, kind of everything's, obviously we had the Gordon Elliott saga as well. It seems like everything in horse racing that could be dug up and presented in a negative light, and the issues which need to be presented in a negative light are kind of all hitting home at once. And so, going back to your original question, 21 million. It's as you say, an estimated 325 million has been lost to the industry, but you shouldn't, be churlish and sniff at it. It's going to tie a lot of things over for the next 2 or 3 months. It's just a question of how long it is until we can get people back on race courses, really, and then it's a case of how long is it going to take to regenerate everything, isn't there? And I agree with Steve's points a little bit. Like, I love racing, don't get me wrong, and I'm mad for jumps racing. Yet I didn't know where to look the other day. I had a Plumpton, Stratford, a Hexham meeting going on. To be honest with you, it was just so much watered down stuff. It just really didn't jump off the page, did it? Really, in terms of on one single day as we're approaching the flat season. I think loads of issues we need a separate 7-hour show for to discuss. But I do think what it has done, it's by hook or crook, COVID has in a way kind of exposed all the things that are wrong and need fixing, and it's almost forcing everyone to now look at them. And I think there will be shake-ups. Unfortunately, I think we are going to lose some of these smaller tracks who are hanging on by a thread. And of course, it's the knock-on effect of the local economy, isn't it? I was actually speaking to someone who runs one of the pasty stalls down at Newton Abbot, and they basically said that on the cider night in August, the money they take on their pasty stall there is the equivalent of 6 months' takings on the high street. And when it hits home like that, you just don't think of it on the kind of wider economic scale. And so there's all the knock-on effects to local economy and everything. And then obviously, I'm going on a bit here, but there's a lot of issues. They're going to be looked at. But 21 million, in answer to your question, is a relief, and it should at least tie things over till we can get fans back on the racecourse, hopefully in the summer at some point.
One of the big talking points at the Cheltenham Festival was the fact that amateur jockeys weren't allowed to compete due to the COVID restrictions, but it looks like they will be allowed to compete as we progress towards Aintree and the Grand National Festival next week, Stephen, which I think will, it's a big pat on the back for those amateurs in the game, but also I think it adds another bit of flavour to what is one of the great meetings. Yeah,
it's a bit of colour, isn't it? Actually, funnily enough, the amateurs came back in the UK this week, and the two races they rode in, I think the SPs of the winners were 125 to 1 and 100 to 1. And one of the wags on Twitter, who works for a bookmaker in Gibraltar, was cheering home, lovely to have the amateurs back. Obviously, they've got mythical, strange things happening. The one who is probably the best amateur in the country, in the world, if not, is Jamie Codd. And he's going to be down to his lowest weight for 17 years, I was reading this morning, to ride in the Irish Grand National on Monday at Fairyhouse. I think he's on the big dog there, so he'll be having a pretty quiet, no Easter eggs for him over the weekend, Shane.
What do you make of it, Ed, with the amateurs coming back? It is, I think, a step in the right direction, but are you a fan of amateur jockeys being able to ride at professional meetings?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'd like them to have their day in the sun, and it did seem really strange, like watching the Kim Muir at Cheltenham with a whole load of professionals on. I mean, whether that's just from habit, you're used to seeing them. You see what I'm saying? It felt a bit awkward watching the big experienced jockeys, if you like. Look, I think it's great. I like the amateur races. You say they are amateur races, but they're exciting spectacles. The quality of amateur jockeys. Not my insight necessarily, but this is someone like Richard Pittman. He says that the quality of like an amateur jockey now compared to even 10, 15 years ago is a different level of nutrition, weight, fitness, the tactics, everything's studied to the nth degree through science. And I love it. Long short of it, I do like watching the amateur races, especially at Aintree, and I hope they continue.
Stephen, just to niggle at you a little bit more because of your anti-Tiger Roll stance at the Cheltenham Festival, the great champion might be taking his place in the Irish Grand National on Monday in preference to perhaps running in Aintree in one of the other grade ones on the card. Do you think it's the right decision to go to the Irish Grand National after all of the theatre of skipping the UK Grand National that he's won 2 times previous?
I mean, I think for me it was the most expensive and humiliating win ever, and he was so impressive in the cross country. I mean, to be the sort of miserable cynic that I am, he's 7 to 1 in one of the hottest, most competitive handicaps. It's a completely different race. Now, of course, he's been there, won the race before, and all the rest of it. Won those sorts of races before, I should say. But I think sort of 6, 7 to 1. If the Tiger Roll who ran in the cross country turns up, then he probably is a 6 or 7 to 1 chance still. But I can't get out of my memory those 2 runs before where he was unconscious, legless, on much softer ground, looking like he'd completely gone. So if he does it twice, I think I'll have to pay Shane, to be honest.
Fair enough. Ed, can you see him perhaps, if they do elect to run in the Irish Grand National on Monday, would you rate him as a legitimate winning chance in that, based on what you saw at Cheltenham?
Hard to tell, isn't it? Because I do think the cross-country races probably exaggerate everything and can lull you into a little bit of a false sense of security. I mean, out of the two, I definitely would go the Irish Grand National over the Bowl. When you look at who's going to line up at the Bowl with Aplutard, Kemboy, Native River, Clanderzobo, St Calvados, I think you'd be lucky to beat the ambulance home in that, to be honest with you. I mean, we got to not get carried away. He is an 11-year-old, and last time he ran off level weights in regulation fences, he looked abysmal. So I probably would go the handicap route. It would be quite funny after all the handicap chat of Aintree if he did run the Irish Grand National, won hard held 15 lengths. There'd be some interesting interviews with the O'Learys afterwards, wouldn't there? But look, he's been a great servant. I got to admit as well, I got him totally wrong. I had him and Easy's Lamb. I literally laid a both for a place at Cheltenham Festival, so that plan went well. And look, it's great to see the old boys still going. And I think they'll go the Irish Grand National. At least I hope they do anyway, because the most realistic chance of winning, I think, would be in that.
I just want to ask you one more point on jumps racing at the moment before we move on to other things. But there's a big talk that we might see a clash over 3 miles of Envoi Allen and also Monkfish at Punchestown. Envoi Allen, of course, Stephen, fell when he was a short price favourite at Cheltenham. How would you see him measure up against Monkfish over 3 miles?
Well, I suspect the market might declare for Envoi Allen, to be honest. He was the only thing that went wrong for Ireland, wasn't he, at Cheltenham with that early fall? I think he's a brilliant jumper, basically. It was just a sort of very rare mishap. Monkfish, although I think he clocked a very good time at Cheltenham, visually watching it, he did prop into a few of the fences. I suspect that was more the loose horse distracting him in front. He's got enormous potential. I mean, that is one of those races. We used to get a lot of these races, Shane, in racing where they didn't avoid each other. If they do meet, that will be a race you'd go a long way to see. I can't say I'd have a massive opinion who I would think would come out on top, but you'd certainly learn plenty from it. Let's hope it happens.
Ed, what about you? Would you side with one horse over the other?
Tricky one, isn't it? It really is a tricky question. I mean, I see the bookmakers priced up match betters evens, Monkfish 11-8, Envoi Allen. Obviously, you're getting a little bit of juice in the price of Envoi Allen after his mishap at the festival. I suppose the more interesting point is like Jack Kennedy said, that Envoi Allen got really fizzy and almost boiled over in the preliminaries before he fell in the marsh. So I suppose there will be a lot of eagle-eyed exchange players, if you like, watching how he goes down to post at Punchestown, because not only will he be taking on Monkfish, he'll be first start at 3 miles. So he'll need to conserve as much energy as possible going up in distance there. If he throws his race away in the prelims, it could be a walkover for Monkfish. And in regards to Monkfish, there was talk about perhaps the ground was a little bit lively for him at the festival. You know, he'd been traipsing around in a bog in the winter in Ireland and absolutely loved it. And perhaps he was just, that found him out a little bit. But look, again, I watched that race, but I agree with Stephen. Visually, it wasn't as impressive, but yet when he hits the line, he's barely come out of second gear. But his jumping will need to smarten up, or he could come a cropper. But look, it's not often you say it, would you? But it's 4 weeks away, that race, and yet it's the first and second favourite for next year's Cheltenham Gold Cup, who could be clashing at Punchestown over 3 miles. Brilliant race. Don't have a strong view either way. I just hope they both line up.
Guys, one last point before we move on. I want to talk about young jockey David Egan because, I mean, UK racing's been blessed with some outstanding talent over the past few years. Asheen Murphy, Holly Doyle, Tom Marquand, Kieran Fallon, and now David Egan, of course. He's had great success partnering up with John Gosden and Mishrif. How do you assess him as a jockey for the future, Stephen?
Well, that was obviously his biggest payday ever in Riyadh, wasn't it? But what an extraordinary performance by Mishrif, because he was part widest of all throughout, and he was one of those horses, if it had been an in-running thing, you'd be looking to lay him, because he had a real rough trip, and he was right up on the hammer throughout, but he kept on pulling out more, and you don't often see horses win those sort of races like that. I know John Gosden now is mapping out the Judd-Monty International, the Eclipse, the King George, and he thinks he's his art course. He's already got a meticulous plan lined out for this horse, and I suspect David Egan will be riding him on each occasion. That they're a really formidable pair, and Mishrif is one of the most game and genuine horses at the top level I've seen for a very long time.
I think, Ed, UK racing is certainly blessed with talent in the younger division for jockeys, and it's great to see because you can see a lot of these young jockeys sort of competing now for the next 10, 15, 20 years against each other, and the talent looks enormous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose he's technically Irish, isn't he, David Egan? But he obviously based over here and riding really well. He's got a winning partner, hasn't he? Every jockey, as they say, almost you need your one horse to kind of propel you into the big time. And perhaps you could argue some of the other younger lads haven't quite found that one horse yet. Yet Mishriff, at one point, was almost starting to be considered a little bit of a back number, perhaps for one of a kinder phrase. That now just seems to be really blossoming. John Gosden has kind of full faith in this horse, and yeah, David Egan could, after a couple of nice paydays, he could be after a couple more this summer. And yeah, but as I say, I agree with you, Shane. I mean, Marcon and Doyle both absolutely excellent, and I do think Kieran Fallon Jr. will land some absolute perler sooner rather than later. I think he's class. So yeah, the future does look bright in the kind of the under 25 brigade, if you like.
All right, guys, that's enough on news topics. Let's now focus on the Grand National, the biggest week of betting when it comes to UK racing. And, as I said, we're about a week away now from the first of the 3-day festival coming from Aintree. Let's have a look at the big race itself, the Grand National, which is scheduled for the Saturday. And we've sort of got Cloth Cap, who we've spoken numerous times, has been well and truly dominating the market for the Grand National, now in as short as 4-1 with Bet365. Any second now certainly well in the market at 10-1. Burrows Saints at 12-1. Manila Times at 14-1. And Kimberlake Candy's another one at 14-1. They're sort of the principal horses in the market. Stephen, I think you've made a really strong case for Cloth Cap since we started talking about him on Jump To It many weeks ago. But as I think you've also highlighted, now from a price perspective, if you've taken him early, you got the big price, it might be time to do some business elsewhere.
Well, I think the move, Shane, is probably, if you have managed to get double figures about him, lay 4-1 or 5-1 back on the exchanges and give yourself a free bet. I mean, he's a bold jumping front runner. I think he's got loads in his favour. The only thing against him now, he is a very, very short price. There's not great margin for error in the Grand National. It's not the race it used to be. It is now a very good staying handicap, basically. The fences are not the factor they used to be. There isn't the carnage. He's liable to be out in front or disputing the lead. I think he'll run an almighty race, but he's a terrible price now, really, being truthful. One to mention who I don't think we've touched on before, who has attracted support this week, is Bristol de May, who's up the top of the weights, ridden by Daryl Jacob. Now, he's known, all the fans of jump racing will know him as a Haydock specialist in bottomless ground, but he's actually come in here fresher than normal. He's missed the Gold Cup. He's never tried this sort of trip in the past, but I should think he'll go well for a long way. And Daryl Jacobs, one of the best jockeys over a fence. The ground, good to soft ground. They interviewed Jacob this week and he said he thinks it will suit him ideally. It will help his stamina for 4 Mile 2, which he was slightly worried about. But at least he comes here fresh. Nigel Twiston-Davies is going pretty well. He's got a reasonable chance, a bit of class. He's a class horse at a big price, Bristol de May. I should think he might outrun his odds looking at the betting now.
Ed, do you think that the market has sorted itself out for the Grand National a week away from the big event, or is there still a fair bit of movement to come?
Interesting one, isn't it, really? And here's got by. Obviously, you normally get the kind of the family favourites, don't you? Or the one year punters where they latch onto the same horse who comes back, either be it the Grey or Tiger Roll was really popular because of his name, etc. etc. You see what I'm saying? So it's hard to tell. Looking through it, I agree with Stephen. I think Cloth Cap's half the battle with the Grand National was staying out of trouble. At least it used to be anyway. At least with Cloth Cap, he's going to be up in the van. He's going to jump. He's going to stay. Again, it's just a Grand National. There are 39 other rivals. You've got to make one little mistake, a bit of carnage, loose horse. There's always something happens. It's never as straightforward as make it out to be. And again, I do think he wants the ground as quick as possible. He's never won on anything officially slow and good to soft. So they'll be hoping the sun shines in Liverpool. But I've picked out one here at a bigger price. I was really. With Cheltenham, I'm kind of staring at these races and going around in circles with them for about 6 months in advance. With the Grand National, I thought, right, I'm just going to come in here with a fresh set of goggles, if you like, at the 11th hour. And I went through them all. Annabelle Fly does really jump off the page to me, around a 33-1 mark for Tony Martin, who was 4th in the race back in 2018. Off a mark of 159. He was allotted a mark of 164 in 2019. He finished 5th. He gets in here off 155. So he's off his lowest rating coming into this contest, and he's been placed in it twice before. Now, I do think he's interested. He's also interested in listening to connections when they say when he was fourth in 2018, he contested the Irish Gold Cup and the Cheltenham Gold Cup going into that. Barry Geraghty felt he'd almost just left his race behind after those two grueling contests. He's had a much different preparation this time around. They ran him in the Bobby Joe chase in February, came last of 5 runners, clearly just to remove the ring rust. I think he's a real interest. I said he loves it round. He jumps opposite the cloth cap, and where he will be hostage to fortune is he will be ridden fairly quietly, at least for the first circuit, and he will have to try and pick his way through. But I think he's a major player. He loves the fences. He's got the course form. As I said, he's £9 lower than last time he ran in it when he was placed. So I think he has to come into the equation.
I want to ask you both just one last question on the Grand National before we touch on some of the other races on the 3-day meeting. Whether it's a Grand National or a Melbourne Cup or one of the other big handicap races globally, the angle was always once upon a time to try and find a horse that you considered to be well in at the weights. It seems to be getting harder and harder to do that these days with rating systems that basically showcase what a horse will carry a fair way out. But do you feel that there are a couple of horses in the Grand National this year, Stephen, I'll start with you, that perhaps are well in at the weights that maybe, if the handicapper had the opportunity, could re-handicap them?
Possibly, I think any second now could be quite well treated, particularly with what the Irish have done in all the handicaps at Cheltenham. He's an interesting runner. Bristol de May we've touched on. I think he could be well treated. Stamina, question mark. I mean, I think one of the things you can look for, I try and find weak links when I'm looking at handicaps, horses I don't fancy up the top of the market who are underpriced. And it is difficult in the Grand National. Cloth Cap, who I do fancy, I do now think is underpriced. So you do tend to go round in circles a bit. There's certainly a case, Shane, on the day, certainly, for punters who will want to have a bet. Search around for bookmakers who offer the extra places. That's the key. The traditional terms would be a quarter the odds, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, in a 40-runner handicap, mathematically, that's hugely in the bookmaker's favour. So look for the go-ahead companies like 365, Sky Bet, who might offer 6, 7 or even 8 places. That way you can back horses each way and have the odds in your favour.
The way I'm going, I think I need them to go back to 21 places just to give me half a sniff. Ed, from your perspective, do you think that there could be 1 or 2 that are under the handicap?
Well, obviously, Cloth Cap officially was he a Stonewell in or whatever? He's due to go up but then his price reflects that. Would he be the shortest price winner for 100 years if he did win it 72 or short or something like that? But yeah, it gets harder and harder now. And I mean, again, it's just my personal opinion. I do find it daft that you have a handicapping system that relates to the entire year, then you almost get this separate one that gets rolled out, and these horses get a lot of these kind of mythical marks on the basis of a kind of a team meeting at 9 o'clock and a glass of Merlot, and so you've got horses running off different. To me, it doesn't quite. I think you should just run off your BHA marks, essentially, like what my point of view. But anyway, it is what it is. Like the favourites undeniably are Stonewell in. If the weather holds true, he's going to get 5 days of glorious sunshine before the National, and he should take a lot of beating. But again, I'm not sitting here smirking like Stephen on it 14, 16 to 1. I don't have that in my portfolio. So yeah, I'm going to stick Vanabelle Fly, but I don't think that. Final point on your question, Shane. What we saw about 5, 6, even 7 years ago, I was going back through it. We saw a lot of younger horses who, like 7, 8-year-olds, in terms of National, having a go because they were unexposed through the angle of perhaps the handicap has no idea where we are with them. What I think you find out a lot more with the Grand National now is it's not really I think you can get too bogged down with weights and measures. Essentially, it's a thorough test of stamina, and there's a lot of carnage. And I do think experience around the course does count for a lot here, and having a lot of experience over marathon trips. There was a time I was looking back, we had horses who were running over 2, 2, 4, 2, 5 throughout the season, suddenly deciding to have a pop at 66 to 1 in the Grand National, getting around one circuit, the petrol light coming on and pulling up, and they thought, we could be well handicapped. No, I think you're better off having an exposed handicap, a states of play, if you like, those type of horses that run around every year. You knew where you were with them, but you knew they'd jump, you knew they'd stay, and you knew they liked the fences. So yeah, so that's why I'm going with Annabelle Fly. I just thought he's 33 to 1. He's been placed it twice. He's off a lower weight. But if Cloth Clap blasts them from the front, then Stephen can buy us all a skinny mocker next time.
Yeah, we'll hold him to that. Don't you worry about that. When we talk Cheltenham Festival, the build-up's enormous because every day is important in the psyche of telling the narrative of the event. There's a championship event each and every day. The Grand National meeting is somewhat different. It's all about the Grand National, the big Grade 3 marathon event on the Saturday. But I think people forget just how good the remainder of the card for the meeting is on the 2 days prior in particular. There's a plethora of outstanding races, Stephen.
Yeah, there's some brilliant horses running, and I know that Paul Nicholls, who had his first blank Cheltenham, I think, for 17 years, has got a very strong team lined up. Hitman, I believe, is going to run in the Manifesto Chase on the first day. He's a really exciting prospect. He'll love the step up in trip. He'll love the decent ground. He's a brilliant jumper. He's probably the most exciting young horse in the yard. And later on in the week, I believe Montmiral's going to run in the Doom Bar, the juvenile hurdle. He's been extremely impressive and his form has worked out particularly well. He's looked the best English young hurdler. So there's lots to look forward to. And Aintree, at the risk of upsetting people, is a much better track than Cheltenham. It's flat. There's rarely any trouble in running. Cheltenham is actually quite a sharp track, particularly in big fields. They come around that final bend. There's a lot of trouble and scrimmaging, whereas Aintree on decent ground in the spring. Shane, you'll remember a horse, our generation, called Morley Street, who used to win at Aintree under Graham Bradley. He was a wonderful top-class horse, and you do see some spectacular performances at Aintree. It's a really good meeting to look forward to.
Stephen, I'm only 21. It must be the lighting in the studio that's not working to suggest that I'm of an older generation. When you think about the 3 days of the Aintree Festival, are there any other horses that stand out to you a week out that you'd like to be playing?
God, how long have we got? I mean, we've got potential of Allaho, Marsty Tommy Tucker going each other in the Melling. I mean, the 2.5 mile hurdle, the Aintree hurdle, we've got Abracadabras is going to step up in trip. We've got Abracadabras, Bouvet there, McFabulous brewing up a storm, Song for Someone. It's an unbelievable race. I think we've got Roxana, Paisley Park and Time Hill in the Liverpool hurdle. I'll be strongly in the Time Hill camp. I just don't think drying ground at Paisley Park's looking slower and slower. I don't think a flat track and 3 miles is what Paisley Park wants at this stage of his career. I think Connections, Emma Laval's basically said they might try and front run with Paisley Park. So at least if he hits his flat spot, comes off the bridle, they've all got to pass him rather than him having to pass the whole field. So I can see the logic of that. We touched upon the bowl earlier with, it sounds like a Plutard and Kemboy coming over, Native River, Clanderzobo, St. Calvados. My friend Mr. Fisher's going to have a crack at 3 miles bowl account. So that'd be interesting. But undoubtedly the race I'm really looking forward to, which I think actually got a couple in here who definitely be playing a part in next season's kind of staying 3 milers, is the 3 mile novice race, where you've got the Marsh winner Chantry House stepping up to 3 miles. You've got Fiddler on the Roof, who followed home Monkfish. You've got the Big Breakaway. You've got a Klepta Rear, who actually I was watching that Monkfish race back. He was travelling really well in the hands of Rachel Blackmore at the time of his departure. So there's some absolutely fantastic contests, and to top it all off, we should have our best old friend Tritonic going in the trying to win it all back in the juvenile against Montmiral and company at Aintree as well. So no, it's a really good meeting. I for so long I've been cannot hear of a bad word for Cheltenham. I am slightly starting to get my arm twisted in terms of the quality of Aintree is really, because it is just packed in. And what you also get is that Cheltenham, you get a lot of busted flushes and reputations. And essentially what you do get now is you get all the best performances from Ireland, the best performances of the English horses. Then they almost now seem to kind of collide at Aintree, if you like. So it should be a thrilling 3 days racing. And if anything, to me, the Grand National isn't quite the highlight. I actually love these Grade 1 contests. I think if they all line up in the bowl, you'll struggle to find that's as good as the Gold Cup in terms of quality of horses lining up, bar Manila Indo, really.
Yeah, well said. Of course, we'll have an extended preview of Aintree on next week's edition of Jump To It. But first, we need to find some winners for this weekend. Well, I'm excited, Stephen, because we've got the end of the National Hunt season coming up. There's still so much great racing in that sphere, as well as the emerging flat season, where there looks to be some outstanding prospects soon to resume. From a betting perspective this weekend, good meetings at Musselburgh and also Haydock. What are you thinking?
Well, first of all, at Musselburgh, which is a really good card, one of their best of the year, good ground, good soft in place at the moment. The 3 o'clock's probably the big betting race of the weekend there. That's the sprint over 5 furlongs. And I really like Eric Alston's 8-year-old Jabberwocky. Now, he's got a brilliant career record on the turf for a sprinter. He's 6 from 29. He's very consistent. He's run once at Musselburgh, where he won by 4.5 lengths, absolutely pulling a bus. Now, I think he's as good as ever. His record fresh is excellent. Jason Hart's been booked for at least 6 days. Obviously, it's a big field sprint, and Musselburgh Shane is a very sharp track. There's not a lot of room, very little margin for error, but they're going to go a strong pace. Jabberwocky should go really close with any sort of daylight in the last 100 yards. And over at Haydock, the 240 was the race I was interested in there. Christian Williams, a trainer who's emerging from quite a quiet winter, he runs 2. The Future is Bright, who's owned by a Palomini and Marmion. He's strongly fancied, but I just prefer Strictly a Dancer from the same stable, ridden by Nick Schofield. He was really impressive at Exeter. He's had a run or two since where he's had excuses. Things haven't gone that well for him. Fakenham wouldn't necessarily be his track, and he was a bit unlucky back at Exeter last time. I think he'll go really well. He's a double figure price, and he's a sporting bet on a really competitive 10.
All right, like that. 2 nice value-priced runners there from Stephen. What about you, Ed?
I'm keeping the powder dry, has to be said. I mean, I'm keeping an eye on Hell Red, who was my tip for the Boodles. I believe Harry Cobden's riding. That horse goes to Newton Abbott. I think he'll win and perhaps go to something like the Swinton Hurdle later in the month. But no, generally, I'm just starting to get really stuck into these entry cards. I think Time Hill's second in at around 11-4. I think that's value for up in Liverpool in a week's time. And I think Abracadabra's, obviously we'll touch upon this more next week's show, but if he's going to get 2.5 miles, I think a flat track around Aintree on dry ground would be perfect for him because he's naturally a very quick horse. He obviously got no further than the 3rd hurdle in the Champion Hurdle. He would have beaten Honeysuckle, it has to be said. But looking who he's lining up against, you've got McFabulous, who arrives on the back of being thumped at Fontwell. Bouverdaire, who's ancient, has to be said. Song for Someone, who got absolutely dispatched by Goshen last time out. So you start looking through it. I think Abracadabra's around 7-2. I think he'll start at least half that price on the day. So that'd be my advice. If you fancy him, I'd probably say if you can get a non-runner no bet as well, take it now because I cannot see for the life of me how he starts 7-2.
All right, that's a good push. Of course, we've got the Irish Grand National scheduled for Monday. We talked about Tiger Roll potentially going in that direction. He's currently the 6-1 favourite for the Great Chase with Bet Victor. You can get latest exhibition at 7-1, Sempo at 8-1. Run Wild Fred at 10-1, as is Augusta Gold. So it certainly looks a wide open affair if you want to disregard the champion Tiger Roll, Stephen.
Yeah, I think I'd probably play against Tiger Roll again and pay again maybe if he does run. The one I think I like the most, though, is latest exhibition. He's only run 4 times over fences. He caught Monkfish last time in a Grade 1 in Ireland. I thought he ran really well. I actually thought he'd go well at Cheltenham, but they've missed Cheltenham to come here, presumably. He's never run beyond 3 miles, but he does shape like a thorough stayer. He's got a touch of class. There should be loads more improvement to come. 6-1 is a fair enough sort of price. And worth mentioning, we touched on it earlier, saying Jamie Codd is down to his lowest weight for 17 years on the big dog. That's something not many of us can say these days. But he's on the big dog there, and that is a very interesting runner. Again, fairly unexposed and comes here in good form after winning last time with no stamina doubts at all about that one.
I can admit that I'm at my heaviest weight for about 17 years. Ed, have you got a winner for the Grand National?
Do you know what? No, because it's so different to Aintree in the sense that trainers commit to the Aintree Grand National from so far out. In regards to this race, Tiger Roll, we still don't know if he's actually going to line up or not, whether it comes to Aintree. Latest exhibition, I agree with Stephen, would be a live runner, but now I think connections are considering running in the 2.5 mile novice race because obviously Envoi Allen was originally going to run in that and is now waiting for Punchestown. So I believe he'd be around a 9-4 shot to win the novice chase, second favourite behind Energamine. And it just seems to be a race full of. I was speaking to a couple of owners the other day. I said, "Oh, you're going to run your horse?" I'm like, "No idea." I'm like, "Hang on a minute. We're only 4 days. We're only 4 days away." So no strong views in it yet because I think there's a lot of cat and mouse going on here about seeing where those at the top of the market are actually going to end up running. If they avoid it, then everyone will turn up, you see what I'm saying? But I've tentatively penciled in Ascaria 10, who ran in the National Hunt Chase at Cheltenham Festival, finished 3rd, ran really well on his first start over that trip, just made a couple of jumping errors late on before being reeled in by Galvin. But no strong views on it yet because I don't think the owners or trainers got strong views on it, so it's pretty impossible for me to.
All right, great insight, guys. Good luck this weekend. We'll catch you again next week.
Cheers, Shane.
There's Stephen Harris and Ed Quigley. And of course, next week, it'll be great to be welcoming Vincent Finnegan back from irishracing.com to add a bit more insight to the panel as we preview the 3-day Aintree Grand National Festival. Of course, most of the talk will be on the big race itself, the Grand National, which is the biggest betting race they have in horse racing in the UK. But it certainly will be a fantastic 3 days of racing from Aintree. Well, we hope you've enjoyed today's show. Special thanks to the team at irishracing.com. Make sure you head there and get all the latest news, racing opinions, bets, betting advice, tips and cards. Vincent and the team do a fantastic job there. And of course, head to bettingexpert.com. You get Stephen Harris's daily tips. He provides a best bet or a nap as well as a value runner for each of the races, meetings that he targets in the UK each and every day. He's been in fantastic form. Stephen Harris there on bettingexpert.com. Hope you've enjoyed today's edition of Jump To It. We'll see you next week.